So in terms of live transcripts, UMD Zoom has given everyone permission to access live transcripts. So if you go into your live transcript button, you can click on that and you have to enable that from your advanced settings. It is not playing for me right now. So I apologize if other folks also cannot see it. For the panel, we will have captioning and we will email you the recording of the panel with the captions. Before we start this conversation, I really want to center intersectionality in our conversations. So I want to say something that we all know, but I think needs to be said again, that we are gathered here as people who are interested in or people who identify under the larger LGBTQ umbrella. However, of course, all of us have really different experiences, and our gender and sexual experiences are always informed by race, nationality, class, etc. So let's just keep this in mind as we have this conversation today. In terms of the format of the event, I'm going to start with the panel. So we'll spend around 25 minutes hearing from the panelists, and then we will have a more sort of open discussion with the students. And in the open discussion, feel free to ask anything. The panelists do not have to respond. You can absolutely say, this is not a comfortable question for me. There are also other folks here who are able to respond to many things. I know I'm on the job market right now, and I've been going through a lot of questions, so I can definitely talk to some folks also. All right, so let's just introduce our panelists. So we have some special guests. Max, Madeline, Cameron, and Mai. Thank you for being here. So I would just like you all to introduce yourselves. And let's just start with Max. So please introduce us. Please introduce yourselves by telling us something about who you are, your pronouns, and your career path.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Max Bedoy, and I use he, him pronouns. I am the Assistant Coordinator Outreach and Assessment over at the Care to Stop Violence Office, which is the University of Maryland's free and confidential therapy advocacy services for survivors of sexual and relationship violence. So I think I'm pretty early on in my career path, to be honest. So I'll just talk about how I got to it from A to Z, or A to B, let's say. So I went to UMD for undergrad, and while I was there, I got my Bachelor of Science in Psychology, my Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy, mostly in moral political philosophy, but also focusing specifically on feminist, queer, and post-colonial philosophy. And then I also got an LGBT Studies certificate, which I would recommend doing if you have the time for it. My current position, I do a lot of outreach for the office. I try to connect students to our services with a specific focus on reaching marginalized communities to make sure that they know about care. And I do a lot of programming around power-based violence, sexual violence, and relationship violence that is hopefully as intersectional and accessible as possible. And my future plans are to go to grad school for a PhD in philosophy, hopefully in feminist and post-colonial epistemology, which is essentially big words for saying I wish that queer and people of color were able to have their own voice in academia. Really, that would be my focus.
Thanks, Max. Welcome. Thanks for being here. So on my screen, Madeline is next.
Hello, tough act to follow with Max, but first of all, so good to see you, Max. It's been a hot minute. The first thing I'll share is my name and pronouns. Hello, Madeline, she, her pronouns. And I actually work in the health center with Max in CARE's kind of sister unit, health promotion and wellness services. So while Max focuses on power-based violence conversations, I focus on substance use conversations, though I also dip my toe into lots of other wellness areas. My background is in public health. I am a proud graduate of University of Maryland. I received my Bachelor of Science from the School of Public Health. I'm specifically focused on behavioral health outcomes for marginalized communities, and specifically about shifting macro culture to support the wellness of marginalized communities. And my plan, fingers crossed, is to enter the health equity program, which is a master's degree through our School of Public Health in the fall. Haven't been accepted yet, but that's the plan because my primary focus is on the intersection of identity and wellness, how who you are informs how you thrive. And my whole background has been in education, specifically in supporting emerging adults, people like high school, college age, which is a lot of times where we really come into our own with our sense of identity, as well as our sense of like what feels good for us in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts. And it's really cool to see Max here because we overlapped in undergrad. I was a senior when Max may have been like a freshman or sophomore. So I say that to say that the queer family at UMD is really big and also really embraces each other. And so I'm super excited to continue to be a proud queer terp. I'm also the new president of the Lambda Pride alumni group. So for those of you who are looking to graduate in the next couple semesters, I hope to see you at some of our alum events.
I would just quickly add on, you reminded me, we both worked at the Office of Multicultural Involvement Community Advocacy as the LGBTQ student involvement intern. I can't believe I forgot to bring that up. Big gay hub of my undergrad career.
For sure.
Her old job, basically.
Yes, and did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Madeline. It's so great to hear about like these queer connections also. Cameron, you are next on my screen.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Cameron Fields. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns, sometimes in the same sentence. And I am a mechanical design engineer. I graduated from UMD back in 2010, so it's been a little while. And so my BS is in mechanical engineering, and I also got a minor in LGBT studies. I did not have quite enough time to get the certificate, but still highly recommend the program. And so as far as my journey, I've been working at W. Gore and Associates since I graduated as a mechanical design engineer, and also transitioned, I guess, 5 years ago. Actually, it might be 6 now at work, so I can speak to that a little bit as well, because it went a lot smoother than I had initially expected being in Cecil County, Maryland. So great to be here.
Thanks, Cameron, and thank you for coming to our event 2 times in a row. Cameron was here last year when we had this event in person, and the student found your advice really helpful.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Great. Mai, you are next.
Oh, hi everyone. My name is Mai. I go by them, he pronouns. I graduated from University of Maryland, College Park back in 2011, so almost 10 years ago. I studied bioengineering. I was one of their first cohorts for the program. And in the past about 8 years, I was working in computer vision, artificial intelligence, image analysis. Right now, I am working part-time, and I'm taking a short break from work and just, just relaxing a little bit.
Thank you, Mai. Welcome, and thanks for being here. And it's also so great to know that you're taking a break from work. Yeah, that's really important, and I think we all need to hear that. All right, so let's just dive into our conversation. I'm really interested to hear about your experiences of navigating like different workplace cultures. So of course, Cameron and Mai, you are in science fields. So I'm curious to know how your experience has been around your colleagues, and Madeline and Max, how your experience has been in higher ed. Have you felt like you can be your authentic self? And what lessons have you learned along the way? And I'm also going to put these questions in the chat.
I'm happy to kick us off with this. So I am in higher ed. I love working in higher ed. I loved college so much that I didn't want to leave. But that said, I did have a period where I got really burnt out around the end of 2018. I got really burnt out in my role, and I actually left this job. I left this job for 2 years, and I thought it was going to be a permanent move. I went to a grad school program that ended up not being a good fit for me because of the nature. I'm just going to name it. It was a women's and gender studies program that was focused around gender, health, and sexuality. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get to do all this cool queer health stuff. It's going to be amazing. And then their professors were really transphobic, and I just like couldn't justify putting money into a program and time and energy and other resources into a program that didn't align with my values. And so I left, and I was like, oh shit, I got bills to pay. What am I going to do? I took a job at another place at an international boarding school, actually, serving as their health and wellness director. And it was a very different place to be a queer person. I was the only openly queer woman who worked at this single gender school, which we know had students across the spectrum of gender, but were all required to kind of socialize as women. And I sort of became this sort of beacon of queer energy for the students there. I loved working there very, very much, in part because I felt like I was able to support students directly in cultivating that queer community. And then this job opened back up that I loved so much that I got burnt out in a little bit, but I felt like I had, kind of recharged my batteries. In that time off, I had figured out a little bit more about who I was as a person, and also how I wanted to show up in the workplace as a queer woman, and how I wanted my queerness to define my work professionally as well as personally. And so I came back into this role even more unapologetically queer than I was before. I was that kid in college. I was president of Pride Alliance. I was the LGBTQ plus COSI. I worked with, I was in the Lavender Honor Society, you name it, I did it. And it's so interesting to come back into this place where queer is less about being a title or a descriptor, which it still certainly is. I still identify as queer very much, but it has also become a bit of my pedagogy. It's become part of my workplace mentality. When I think about queerness, I don't just think about my sexuality. I think about seeing the world through a different lens. And it really informs my work in substance use, which is predominantly focused around cisgender, straight, rich, white men, right? And I am very few of those things. I am cisgender, I am white, I am not any of the rest of those things. So I think it's really, really important to understand and give yourself space and time to understand how you want your queerness to exist in the workplace. There is no right answer. For me, my right answer was it has to be in Technicolor in all places for me. For other folks, it's like, I just want to be a person and be respected in the workplace. And that's just as valid, right? But figure out what you want that to be for yourself, and don't accept anything, an offer, a title, anything that will not let you show up exactly how you choose to show up.
Beautiful. Thank you, Madeline. Would anyone else like to respond?
Cameron, would you like to go?
Sure, yeah, I can chime in. So in navigating the workplace, so I had a few internships while I was still at University of Maryland. And so this was back in the aughts, when there weren't a ton of places with LGBTQ inclusive employment non-discrimination laws. And so when I had my internship out in Colorado, which did not have any of those protections, I felt like I had to be back in the closet just to, protect myself. But that experience in trying to, sort of fem it up, so to speak, it just was miserable, and I hated it. And so I decided that any other place that I went or interviewed from then on, I was just going to show up as myself, and they could, take it or leave it, because I wasn't going to make myself miserable for, money. And thankfully, well, I guess I've only been at Gore since then, but yeah, it was nice to be able to, show up to work as myself. I was a little concerned when I went to my first internship up there, but then when I met the rest of my intern cohort and someone had a green mohawk, I was like, okay, I'll be all right. And so, yeah, it's been really positive to have a place that, has strong workplace protections, has gender identity and sexual orientation in their non-discrimination statement and anti-harassment statement, that has a LGBTQ employee resource group, which I actually lead now. And yeah, I think just, yeah, like Madeline said, you want to work somewhere where you can be your authentic self. And that can be a little daunting in the sciences, since people tend to skew a bit more conservative. And it's also, in engineering in particular, is pretty white, pretty male dominated as well. So showing up as a, AFAB person and, gender nonconforming and queer all at the same time, while also being Black. It's like, I think a lot of people just didn't know what to do with that. So I think that also, yeah, kept people from being, I think they just didn't have any idea what to expect. So that's sort of freeing in a way, because there's not many other people like me where I am. So I took advantage of that by just being me. And it's worked out so far. So hopefully that continues. But yeah, just be yourself, own it, and you'll land the place where you should be.
Thank you, Cameron.
I can go after that. I'll speak to higher ed again, student affairs. Like Madeline, I loved college enough to not want to leave. I really enjoyed college because I felt like I could be authentic everywhere about my identity. And towards the end of my college career, I was convinced that like that would never happen for me in a workplace again. I was so like set on, I'm going back into the closet, guys, enjoy it while it's here. I have no idea why I thought I would be able to manage that when I made a whole like life for myself, just doing everything queer as much as possible on campus, getting involved in as many queer things as I could find. So I guess my like view of the future was either I'm going to go entirely back in the closet, or I'm going to be gay for pay and like gay nonprofits, which didn't feel like the best fit for me anyway. But again, what I liked about staying in student affairs is that I continued to be able to be authentic as much as possible in my space. Outreach is a little interesting because I interface with so many different audiences all the time, trying to convince them of things and get buy-in from things. People come from very different places, but that is something that I've learned to manage along the way. I think that overall I've had a pretty positive experience. I'm lucky to work in an office that is basically grounded on a social justice issue, and does a lot of education with students, and they have best practices baked in about like pronouns and inclusivity and stuff like that. I think I have struggled a little bit at the beginning with being misgendered and pronoun practices and stuff, and dress codes really, really were frustrating, even though I'm in an office that has a pretty lax dress code. I think it was stressful mostly because of all those different audiences I had to meet. Like some people I meet in a specific department may be way laxer than speaking to people from admin, so, or like just speaking to students. So I really had to be mindful of what I was wearing. One thing that sticks out a lot to me from when I started working that I still remember very clearly was when I was talking to another transmasculine person, and they said that if you go into a workplace wearing masculine like clothing and you're not necessarily like transitioning in a very specific way. Like I have no intention of doing any sort of medical intervention to reflect my trans masculinity for like a lot of different reasons. But a lot of men's professional clothing just doesn't, it kind of looks sloppy, to be honest. It doesn't fit right, but you also don't want to wear blouses and blazers that have the button on the wrong side and stuff like that. So what I was told was when I go into an office, I should look at what cis men are wearing in that space and then try to dress one step above that. Like if everyone's wearing a dress shirt and dress pants, then I should do the same, but like have a tie or have a blazer or stuff like that. Obviously I don't do that. I'm really, really bad at being formal. I have like 2 dress shirts that I use to talk to admin. And to be honest, sometimes I just come in wearing a t-shirt, which is like really pushing it, but I'll wear like a social justice slogan on it. So like it'll say, not your model minority. And if anybody looks at me weird, I'm just like, wow, do you hate Asian people? I'm gonna wear this and you can't make me stop wearing it. So dress codes are funny. I also do a lot of presentations in front of students that talk specifically about relationships and therefore also masculinity. So I have a weird relationship with that because my authority on masculinity is very odd for people to grapple with. I guess there's just a lot of stuff, thank you, that I'm still grappling with in terms of being authentic in my role, just because my role just shifts so much depending on what environment I'm in, and outreach is also so many different activities. But some of the lessons I've learned along the way were to, I really try to trust in my ability to advocate for myself. Aw, sorry, the chat is just, I love the energy. But at the same time, I also try to stay comfortable with enlisting allies in my workplace. I've had coworkers who came up to me after like large meetings that we've had where I was misgendered, and they very discreetly or subtly asked, like, is there something you would like me to do when that happens in the future based on different audiences? And usually I personally am more conservative with like wanting people to step in for me. But it's good to find those folks in your workplace just for morale reasons sometimes, but also like very concrete help with situations. And I think the third final lesson, I guess, is to find affinity spaces if you can. I think finding allies is really important, but finding other queer people is even more important. I think there are some great affinity spaces at UMD for queer people that I need to go to more often. I'm so glad that they exist. I'm very like thankful for that. And also another thing, sorry, fourth and final, is that you should have a strong work-life separation. Like after 5, a big part of making the workplace as navigable as possible, I guess, is being able to like just take off that hat at the end of the day and talk to people who aren't from work, who are also supportive of my queer identity, or maybe more supportive of my queer identity than people I might have talked to earlier that day who weren't as great. Yes. Sometimes when I talk about LGBTQ issues, I feel like I'm perceived as talking about a very white issue. That's another like thing. But that's what I'll close on. I'm still figuring that one out. Don't love it. Grappling.
Thank you, Max. So much good advice.
I'm glad it can be useful, hopefully.
Thank you, everyone. So as far as for myself, I, since graduation, I think I've been pretty fine in terms of being treated the way I want to be treated. When I was working at the patent office, I think I was dealing with some issues regarding my gender that I wasn't completely aware, and I mixed those issues with depression. So I wasn't aware of what was happening, so I didn't, know what kind of help I wanted to get. But yeah, so I had this feeling that I had to go back to my old country to figure out what was going on. And when I went back to my old country, I learned that I had been I learned I was trans, and I had been growing up in America in the wrong gender. So I went back from the trip, and then I didn't know what was going on. So I kind of needed like some kind of gender therapy or gender therapist, but I couldn't find that kind of person because, you know, they're so rare. So I left my job at the patent office and then decided to do my own gender therapy on my own terms. So that's the stage that I'm in right now. So currently I'm working at a gym, and people know that I recently transitioned and that I go by mostly he pronouns. I also go by they pronouns as well, but they mostly address me as he, and that makes me very happy. And people are very respectful. So yeah, no problem there. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. My one thing that I definitely think about whenever I'm making a decision to move to a place for a job or something, or looking at their benefits, is to make sure that I can have a therapist, because I know that like that is my need, and I do think that like that is okay to do. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. So I really appreciated your answers. I know that Max touched on this briefly, but I also wanted to ask you, in addition to all the positive experiences you've had, how have you navigated different microaggressions that have shown up? So I know that for me, a lot of times in my department at UMD, but also in my recent interviews, I was constantly being misgendered, which made me more nervous for the interview. And I didn't really know how to like navigate that in that moment where like they had so much power over me. So like particularly for students who are going on the job market, or who are in more sort of vulnerable positions, what kind of advice would you give around navigating microaggressions? Or do you have any stories to share?
So one of the strategies that I tend to use with microaggressions when I'm feeling particularly patient is curiosity. So asking somebody what they meant by what they said, and basically making them have to realize that they screwed up. And also being sort of polite but direct. And it's like, hey, I noticed you used the wrong pronoun there. My pronouns are actually this. And sort of being willing to sort of engage and offer resources. I think that sort of helps people, because I think for the most part, people, want to be respectful and appreciative, and there's just all this default cis sexist nonsense in people's brains that they don't necessarily think through. And so, yeah, very often you have to, be the one to speak up and disrupt that, and encourage people to learn something new and do better. Granted, there are some people who are just, jerks, for lack of a better term, and yeah, you can't really sort of reform them. You just have to, at some point, finding allies who can help you navigate those people, or finding supportive leadership that can address the situation when you don't feel empowered to do it yourself, can also be helpful. So yeah, finding that support structure is important when you can. But that's more so when you're already in the job. If it's in the interview, that you can use that as a signal that, hey, this company is not providing, at least the people in recruiting or human resources, the resources that they need to, deal with diverse communities. And so that is an important data point when making a decision if you even want to work there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I resonate with so much of what you said, Cameron. Truly, like making that a bullet point, like I'm like writing that down somewhere straight up, because it's so true. And I think I have a complicated relationship with this question, in part because aside from having like some very fabulous blue hair that I desperately need to get touched up, so it's tucked in right now because it's a little on the not as cute side, but in general, I pass for a straight person. I'm also white and cisgender. So I move through the world despite having a queer identity that is so critical to who I am. I walk through the world and people don't necessarily code me as queer in the same way that they may code some other folks in this space. So first of all, I want to name that. I also want to name that that presents its own set of challenges and opportunities to rise to the occasion on behalf of your queer siblings and other marginalized siblings. So I'll name a specific example. So I mentioned before that prior to coming back to University of Maryland, I worked at a boarding school, and this is not a knock on the boarding school at large. This is working with parents as an educator. And in a boarding school environment, the educators are more than just your classroom teachers. In many ways, they become the student's extended family because they are not living with their families. Like who they live with is who teaches them. So I was their health teacher, but I was also, that big sister figure for so many students. And they would come to my office and take naps on my couch and really form this really strong bond with me, particularly the queer kids, because straight people may not code me as queer, but queer game recognized queer game. And these sweet little queer babies would come to my office and just like have that safe space to be gendered in the way they wanted to be gendered, to be seen and, talk about their partners and, all the things that you deal with in high school, right? Like romance, identity, figuring out what you want to do and who you want to be in the world. And one of the parents who I think went into the conversation well-intended, but did not needed some further education on how to optimally support their child as they navigated their identity. They began to speak to me like I agreed with them that having a queer identity was somehow a knock against their ability to have a meaningful future. They were really concerned about their child's ability not to get into college, but to make a way for themselves if they decided on this lifestyle, right? It was what, 2019, and we were still using the word lifestyle to give you some context. And they assumed I was straight, and they assumed I would agree with them and would give them strategies to help tone down their students' behavior. And what I actually said is, when you look at me, what do you see? And they told me what they saw. I said, okay, what you don't see is that I'm a queer woman and I navigate the world as a queer woman, and I figured that out when I was around your students' age. I figured out my identity, but I figured out that that was a really important part of who I was. I'm not here to say who your kid is. What I am here to encourage for you is to embrace your child for whoever they choose to be, because your child is amazing. And to not embrace all of them is to really miss out. That's a really small example, and there were certainly much larger examples related to standing up to administration, again, because I had the privilege to do so as a cisgender white woman. But that's, I think, the low-hanging fruit of using your privilege. For my friends here who are cisgender or white or hold other privileged identities, it's a real opportunity, if you choose for it to be, to provide that compassionate education and move the needle a little bit for folks. So if that's something that speaks to your spirit and is authentic to your process, I highly encourage you to do it. Use that positional privilege and power for good, and help out your queer community, because it's critical that we take care of each other. It is absolutely critical that we take care of each other. Like Max said, it's amazing to have allies, but family matters too. And queer family, chosen family, is so critical to our sense of well-being as queer people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madeline. Max and Mai, do you want to respond to this?
I have two shorter things to say, I suppose. For the interviewing process, the applying a job process, I have nothing useful to say because I had to come up with a presentation to give to audition for my job. And right out the gate, it was on pronoun practices. So I was just very, first of all, that's the only thing I felt comfortable coming up with a presentation for on the spot. Second of all, I just wanted that out of the way since I knew I was going to continue working at UMD. I think microaggressions I have mostly related to pronoun stuff, which again, like, doesn't come up that often. But again, as an outreach person, you really have to be tactical about the way you're showing up in every single space and matching the requirement. Like, appearance is so very, very tactical. One thing that I used to struggle with or be frustrated with was like large meetings with different types of stakeholders. And depending on the type of stakeholders that were there, I noticed that sometimes people were more tactical about whether they introduced themselves with their pronouns or not, or whether they prompted people in the group to use their pronouns or not. That's still something I think about a lot. I think over the last 2 years I've worked here, more people are just like, they get it. They're going to do that by default. And I never want to pressure anyone to like sharing their pronouns. Obviously, that's weird for me to do, at least. There are a lot of situations, unfortunately, where I just don't have an actual thing I can do because it might like jeopardize what I'm trying to achieve in a space, right? I think I will echo something that was said earlier by Cameron, which is supervisors. I think you said this. I'm sorry if my memory is terrible, but sometimes I'm in situations where there's not much I can do to fix what is happening or what happened. So for example, I worked with a department to deliver masculinity related trainings or just like trainings in general to a mostly POC, like masculine audience. And I was talking with those stakeholders about how they thought it was going. And they were like, I think it would resonate more if you had men who were presenting or men of color who were presenting. And it was just like, oh no, I didn't realize that was going on. And I had some colleagues who were also men of color who didn't really say anything to it or just like nodded through it. And that kind of sucked a lot. But, you know, I would talk to my supervisor about it. I think when I started working, I had this complex about really wanting my supervisor to like me, trying to impress them all the time. But there's also another part of your relationship with your supervisor that they're paid extra for, which is to advocate for you and to step in for you when you need to have, when conversations need to be had and you don't really want to be the person directly having it. Personally, I was very uncomfortable with that idea for a long time because I want to do everything by myself. But in the long run, I've really had to like rely on that. Not because my workplace like has any like specific issues that I like deal with, but sometimes again, creating the content I need to present, I feel like I'm viewed as the person who's going to insert the perspective that's not the person of color perspective. Oh, this is going to be the gay perspective or something. Which always feels like I'm being flat and feels like whenever I talk about anything that isn't race, I'm becoming the representative of a white issue. So that's something I've talked to my supervisor about like recently, and I've had great like emotional unpacking with them and like trying to figure out ways I want to have conversations about it, just about approaches to different content we want to make. And it's been really like healing and helpful. Sometimes it's actionable, sometimes it's not, but just talking to my supervisor is a lot. Or helps me a lot, at least, the kind of dynamic I have with her. And again, like allyship is so helpful. There are like multiple people in my office who like check in on me and like reach out and just ask stuff, which is nice because I'm not the kind of person who reaches out mostly. I'm trying to get better at that. Those are my stories. That's it.
Thank you, Max.
Mm-hmm.
Mai, would you like to add something before we move on to Q&A?
Okay, sure. In terms of being misgendered, it's interesting for me because being misgender in English is not that big of a deal to me because English is my second or third language. So there is that distance from having it affecting me on a visceral level. So I am pretty aware of that. But generally, for my culture, if people misgender me, I feel totally fine. I don't know. Yeah, I'm just totally fine with it. And even in America, I'm also fine, but like not like, but at the same time, it's like I take it more seriously because I'm pretty aware of my position in this society. Yeah, and I haven't been purposely misgendered by anyone at work. So yeah, people I have worked with are really good about this. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Mai. All right, such great stories, great advice. I feel like I need a minute to soak all of this in. But we are short on time. We have 15 minutes for Q&A, so we're gonna stop recording now. So you can